Anyway, where I was, critical mass. Yes, so we have this critical mass, and you know what it's like because this is your business. You put enough artists together, and you give them enough money, and things start to happen, and more money is generated, and more art is made, and more art is seen, and thus more artists are inspired, and that's what we've had in Chicago for many, many years, in theater and in many other arts. The artists in town, by the way, pretty much to a person, if you talk to them, and I hope you do, all love Mayor Daley, our current Medici prince, because he knew this and pursued it avidly as a matter of policy. He knew that tourists flying in to see Wicked during its 3-year run in one of our beautiful renovated former theatrical palaces downtown was very important to the city and its income. But he also knows that the storefront theaters and the artist spaces and the music venues are all really important as well, and they have thrived with encouragement from our government. And I should say, of course, our funders, our local merchants and our local legacies of merchants. The MacArthur Foundation, I have met Mr. Driehaus of the Driehaus Foundation, a remarkable guy, made a lot of money, I think hedge funds or something like that, something I don't understand. And I went to an event, wasn't here, that iteration of the event was something he funded. It was a big award ceremony in radio. He put a lot of money into radio here in Chicago, as well as a lot of other things. And there was this guy walking around this event, this cocktail party, wearing this 3-piece brown corduroy suit. And he had this huge, well, what I would call a Jufro, out to here. And I was like, who is that very strange looking man? And they said, that's Richard Driehaus. He funded the whole thing. And I'm like, yes, you would have to be rich enough to dress like that. Anyway, thanks to this relatively enlightened government, and thanks to these local funders, and thanks to companies like Boeing, who, when they moved here, pretty much found out that one of the things you do as a Chicago institution is you support the arts. We have this remarkable scene that is so much more important, if you ask me, to our city and its reputation and its quality of life than, say, deep dish pizza, which, by the way, only tourists eat. Do not eat it. It is not pizza. It is a horrible bread-based lasagna product. If you want dining recommendations, talk to me. So anyway, if you ask me, in a word, why Chicago is not Detroit, it's because all the people who might flee because of the weather or the vanishing industrial base, or maybe because they're just tired of watching all those planes go by overhead without them on it and they want to get on one, we don't leave because if we're afraid if we do, we'll miss something cool. I remember once it occurred to me that I'm one of those people who always is worried that you're missing something. Something's going on. I wrote a book a year or so ago, and what do you call it when you have a quote that starts your book? Not an epigraph? Is that an epigraph? Thank you. You guys are very knowledgeable. This is like a Mad Libs kind of speech. I just say, what do I want to say? And you say, pungent point about the arts in today's society. And I say, yes. It's collaborative. Anyway, the epigraph in my book is the line from the movie Diner. You ever get the feeling something going on that we don't know anything about? That's like the hallmark of my life. There's something going on out there. And it occurred to me that in LA, you're afraid there's some deal happening that you don't know about. In New York, it's a dinner party, a really cool dinner party. In Chicago, it's like a really cool performance, that you find out about too late. Oh my God, did you see this Our Town that was done in this basement? Most amazing thing I've ever seen. It's like, no, I missed it. That's my fear in Chicago. In San Francisco, by the way, it's an orgy, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, so that's us. That's us in Chicago. We love it here because there's so many cool things happening, and you don't want to leave because something cool might happen tomorrow that you didn't hear about. Well, what about you guys? What about the people who are out there funding it? I am assuming that this is an odd time to be in your business, to be in the business of raising money to give to the arts and actually giving money to the arts. These are hard times and perilous times. Poverty is at an all-time high. In fact, I read just this morning's New York Times that a quarter of the city of Philadelphia are on food stamps, and 100,000 more people in Philadelphia need food stamps but aren't getting them. So that might put arts giving in perspective, both for you and for the people who you're raising money from. I mean, and it affects me personally. For example, this year so far, I've made 2 donations of $1,000 or more. One was to a theater company I'm very attached to here in town, called the House Theater Company. The other one to my dear friend Joe Carson, who's also a friend of Lisa Mount's, who is having a second bout with cancer. And what's weird about this is each gift I made me feel guilty about not giving the other one more. And I'm not quite sure how that worked out. So maybe you ask yourself what the point is of funding another original opera, maybe. I'm a big collector of anecdotes, my own and others. And so to give you my perspective on that question, I will give you 3 anecdotes. 1 of mine, 2 I told from other people. And they sort of sum up in the collective my thoughts about this issue. The first anecdote comes from my friend, I haven't talked to her in a number of years, but we were close at a time, named Morgan Jeunesse. You might know Morgan. She was a literary manager and a dramaturg who, back 20 years ago when I was in this business, was a mother figure to a lot of playwrights and plays that happened primarily in New York, but all over the country. Now I believe she's an agent in New York, still doing that role. And Morgan told me this story from her youth. And by the way, I remember I told this story at the Alternate Roots Conference I went to in 1992, another wonderful arts organization that I was briefly a part of that's doing amazing things in the American Southeast. Anyway, so Morgan told me that when she was a young woman, she was obsessed with Mother Teresa, loved Mother Teresa, just thought that Mother Teresa was the be-all and the end-all of what is good or potentially good in humankind. And one day, she finds out that Mother Teresa is visiting, this must have been late 70s, early 80s, she's visiting New York City in some sort of mission from Calcutta to address the UN, I think it was. And Morgan, was such a, if you will, a Mother Teresa fangirl that she found out when she was going to be at her hotel and staked it out, right? So I remember her telling me this story. The car pulls up, and it opens door, and all these little nuns get out, this little row of nuns, like a line of penguins. And out comes Mother Teresa. And Morgan goes up to her and says, "Oh, Mother Teresa, I'm so excited. I'm just so thrilled. I think what you do is so important." And Mother Teresa, being Mother Teresa, was very nice and very gracious. And Morgan said, "And I would love so much to come and work with you and do what you do because what you do is so important, and I want to come and do it with you." And Mother Teresa looked at her, and I always remember this. She said, "No, you should only come to be with us in Calcutta when you love the people we are working with so much that you can't stand to be apart from them." And Morgan kind of heard this and nodded, and she realized this was not her perspective, and there was something to be understood there. And then Mother Teresa said to Morgan Jeunesse, "What do you do?" And Morgan Jeunesse said, "Oh, nothing. I mean, nothing important. I work in a theater. I work with plays. It's like, this wealthy country has theater. Who cares?" And Mother Teresa said to Morgan Jeunesse, "There are many different kinds of famine. In my country, in Calcutta, we have a famine of the body. In your country, there is a famine of the spirit. Stay here and feed your people." Story number 1. Story number 2, and it pertains to me, and it pertains to my aforementioned pretension about wanting to change the world. Can you hear that? That's very annoying. I thought I silenced it, but somebody's trying to reach me. Second story. You may have heard me, as I said, mention my pretension, and I should say that when the radio show began, it was, shall we say, disappointing compared to my ambitions of winning that Pulitzer and that Nobel and that MacArthur grant. Instead of changing the world or telling the world what was wrong with it, I was making jokes about the week's news. Hardy, hardy, har. And then 9/11 happened. And it's kind of funny. We don't really remember this now. But at the time, everybody believed to a person that the world had changed irrevocably, that we would never be as we were before. This turned out to be incorrect in some ways. But at the time, we, the 5 of us who were working on our radio show just a mile or so from here at Navy Pier here in Chicago, were like, well, we're out of a job. Not that anybody had told us that, but we just assumed that to be the case, that why would anybody ever want to hear anybody make a joke about the week's news ever again? The time for comedy was done. But the days went by. We didn't do a show that first week. It happened on a Tuesday. No shows that weekend. But the next week, it was time to do a show. And what are you going to do, And we thought of doing like an amusing show about funny topics in history, but we were like, no, And I even said this at the top of the show. I said, one of the things we've all admired and so struck by the last week is the people who did their jobs, even at the cost of their own lives, thinking of the rescue people and the firemen and so on and so forth. That there's something about people going to their jobs in this moment of crisis that was so impressive. We decided we should only do the same. They also serve who stand aside and make stupid jokes, as Milton might have said if he were in my position. So we did our show, and it wasn't a very good show, but it was our show. We made jokes. And we got this remarkable outpouring of appreciation, for the most part. Some people were like, no, too soon. But hundreds and hundreds of emails. And in terms of proportion to our audience, at that time it was around 100,000, maybe 200,000 nationally. Now it's 3-point-something million. It was probably the largest proportion of response to our audience that we've ever gotten. And all of these people said the same thing, more or less. They said, thank you for giving us a break. The news has been so hard. The future seems so dire. It was such a pleasure to take an hour and goof around, or have you goof around on the radio for us. And that has been consistently the response I've gotten to my radio show. In addition to, oh, you're so funny and it's so charming and that smart thing you said and blah, blah, blah. That was a lot more self-serving than I meant it to be. You should know that when people say those things to me, I'm holding them in silent contempt for being so easily fooled. Just so you know. Just so you know. Sorry. Anyway, back to where I was. People come up to me and they say, things are hard for me, and your show is such a wonderful respite. People have come up to me and said, I've had cancer, and listening to your show was something, I was like, I'm going to be okay this week because I want to get to Wait, Don't Tell Me. People told me that they lost their jobs or lost their spouses or went through medical crises or went through job crises or personal crises. And our show, it didn't solve their problems. Lord knows. It obviously can't even solve mine. It gave them a respite. And giving people a break, I've decided, as well as giving them something to do while they wash their dishes, is a decent enough job. The last anecdote with which I'll close is another one from a friend of mine. His name is Steve Hendrickson. He's a wonderful actor based in the Twin Cities. If you live there, Vicki, you've probably seen him in many, many things. He acted in a play I wrote once quite well. And Steve, he allowed me to use this anecdote in a book, so I know I can tell it to you. Steve has a son who was, I don't know if they're still using the term, Asperger's on the autistic spectrum, and the usual difficulties, the usual problems, the usual struggles. But at a certain time and at a certain point, I believe his son was at the time around 10 or 11, he had progressed enough in his therapy and his maturity that they decided it was all right to take him to see a play. They were a little worried. They didn't know how he would behave. Obviously, he didn't understand the requirements of behavior in a theater, but everything went great. It was great. They took him to the Children's Theater in Minneapolis, as you know, an excellent theater and amazing stuff. And they're famed, of course, for their remarkable scenic effects. And so his son, afterwards, was like, that was great. I wonder how they did that, and I wonder how they did that, and I wonder when the guy flew how they did that, and I wonder. And Steve was thrilled. He's a man of the theater. He's an actor, and he was so excited that his son loved this and wanted to know about it, so he started to explain it. He said, well, in the flying effect, the way they do it is it's black, and his son said, no, Dad, I don't want to know. I want to wonder. Thank you all, and welcome to Chicago. And I will give you dining recommendations.